Welcome everybody today to the Operationalizing AI in the Enterprise, where the rubber meets the road, or whatever ridiculously long title I picked up for this. I apologize. Real quickly today, to introduce everybody, my name is Connor Jensen. I am the Director of Data Science for the Americas here at Dataiku. With me are three customers, Sarah Cullum from Clorox, the head of their direct-to-consumer analytics team, Rasul Tamasbi. I didn't practice that beforehand, so hopefully I was close enough. Thank you, Rasul.
Yes.
He's the leader of the data science team at Palo Alto Networks, with some other interesting things in the background. Hopefully everybody will get a chance to talk a little bit about that, as well as Mike Beckert, data scientist at J&J, specifically at Janssen in their pharmaceuticals group. And we're here today to talk a little bit about, as you've heard from all of us, working in sort of non-traditional AI companies, not data first, not digital natives, companies who have been around for sometimes fairly new, sometimes for a very long time. You know, J&J, Clorox, both very old companies. Palo Alto Networks, a fairly established tech company, where regardless of what the industry actually is, none of them started out doing AI. And all of us have been part of now bringing companies like this, legacy companies, which is slightly pejorative, so still trying to figure out a better word for that, but companies that didn't start out as AI companies. How do you bring data-driven decision-making? How do you bring AI-driven decision-making to those companies? And what are the challenges around that, especially starting to do it at scale, where you're really talking about doing operationalization? And so, you know, my own experience, I came from the financial services sector before moving over to tech, did this same sort of journey at a couple of different companies, and really found this really, really challenging, right? And there's a lot of roadblocks that come up in doing this. And I think that trying to do AI in these sort of companies that specialize in something else is a lot harder than doing AI at the sort of like cutting edge companies. But you guys have all had actually flavors of both of this. And so what do you guys think about that? Where is it harder, doing the cutting edge stuff or doing this in some of these, you know, like older companies?
So I would say on my end, I've seen challenges along the way, pretty much in any of the companies that I've been a part of, even the ones that started off from scratch and digitally native companies. So I was in marketing consulting with some of the bigger financial services types of companies before joining Jet.com, then merging into Walmart.com, and then coming over to Clorox and kind of being at the beginning of this direct-to-consumer group. And so I would say that, different companies are probably going to be more weighted into some of the different challenges that you see along, the spectrum of the data science journey. But some of the themes that I've definitely seen are finding the right, business fit, for projects, really scoping it out correctly from the beginning and making sure that the projects are going to have a tangible impact on the company, having access to the right data or data infrastructure, having realistic expectations about how iterative the process of building models can be, and then finally the last mile component that you've spoken about, of how do you actually take these models once you've created them and put them in the right place so that they're driving value for the company, and especially as the different ways that we can plug models into different systems and different use cases has proliferated so much.
So it's hard at the beginning, it's hard at the middle, and it's hard at the end, right?
Yeah.
So
correct.
Good there. Rasul, Mike, how do you guys feel about what Sarah and I have said?
Yeah, so I think I have amazing experience in my previous company where it was a gold mining company. So because I would say gold mining companies are a little slower in terms of technology, so there was no good infrastructure. They were almost new to AI concept and so on. So we had a little problem to convince them how we can use data. And actually, they had not enough sensors to measure data. So there was not good signal in data, and there was not good infrastructure. So we had lots of challenges, but at the end, we could solve all of those challenges successfully.
Yeah, and I can't speak to being on the cutting edge companies, those tech companies. This is actually my first industry jobs since leaving academia. But I will say that being in an older company, if healthcare historically, healthcare is a little slower to adopt newer technologies as an industry as a whole. However, now J&J is really leaning into data science, advanced analytics, data-driven solutions, and there's a lot of excitement around the company. So for the past couple of years now, there's been a lot of development in some early machine learning models, but now we're really hitting that last mile where we've shown success, we've shown value, and now we need to push all these models into production. And it's a little more challenging than maybe developing was this fun experimentation process. Now it's like, now we need to automate, we need to really get things nice and neat and clean. So I definitely see this as an issue.
Well, and in a lot of times when you're looking at data science research or data science papers or things like that, it's always about new algorithms or new problems to solve or new approaches of doing the math, right? And as somebody who studied mathematics, I've always at least been with a little bit of hubris sort of said the math is the easy part, right? Very rarely is the hardest part of data science the actual building of the model. So as you guys have all talked about, you've got a variety of sort of where you're at in the different company journeys. And so just to help frame, some of the questions, where is your company at today in terms of you're, very early on this journey, you're doing a handful or a few projects, or you've got, 1,000 models in production? Where do you guys kind of sit along that scale?
So we're at the very beginning of our journey, I would say, at least in my group. So within Clorox, the direct-to-consumer group itself is very new. I've been with the company a little bit over a year. And so a lot of our focus over the time that I've been there is to build the foundation. We've had a lot of leeway, I think, because we're kind of creating a new capability to build our own tech stack and, the right tech stack and put in the right infrastructure, organize the data, in the way that we ideally want it, from the start. So really, it's been those foundational pieces and putting in the right tech stack and the right modeling tools. And so we're now at the point where we can start really leveraging that foundation that we've built. So at the moment, we have one model in production, which is the forecasting model for our marketing team to use. And now we have a list of models, in the pipeline that we'll actually get to launch into over the course of the next year.
Great.
Yeah. We have several, we are fortunate to have several models in production for customer supports, for marketing team, for sales. But we are also exploring lots of other opportunities and doing lots of POCs. So I would say those POCs also will go to production soon.
Okay.
Yeah, and we have several models that are still in the manual sort of refresh mode. But we do have a fair number of models that are fully productionized, and actually with that productionization is also looking to expand and scale out to other use cases for similar like either new brands if it's a drug brand or different regions of the world. So we have a fair amount in production, but we're always looking to improve, and we know that those models that are in our backlog are going to have to get into production at some point. So we're say half in, half out.
Well, and I think it's an interesting point you make there, Mike, in that a model doesn't have to be, or production, I guess, could mean a lot of different things, right? And that's, that key piece, and Sarah, you talked about this early on, and sort of the challenge of finding a problem and finding the business fit for it, because, you don't have to be doing something crazy in production for people to be getting value out of it, right? But I think, and Rasul, I know you and I have talked about this in the past, is as you get more models out there and people are sort of doing them, or Mike, like you talked about, manually refreshing and things like that, right? This does start to weigh on us, and it makes it a challenge for us to then spend the time where the real challenges are. And so as we think about this journey towards moving to more production and getting it so that, we're not manually updating things, we're not doing these, maybe an overly reductive framework, but one to at least help align some of this. I often think about problems in terms of people, process, and technology. Where do you think the biggest challenges are in this sort of march to production and doing AI at scale of those three sort of elements? And Russell, why don't you go first?
Yes, so sure. So for productionized project, especially when you have lots of projects, gradually you will have more projects. So I would say a model should be reliable. So it's really important that you have technology which is reliable. And then debugging. Sometimes your model will fail. due to any reason, then you need to have something useful a tool to debug it easily and improve your model. Or it requires low effort for maintenance. So these are really important factors for productionizing a project.
Okay. So very much like a technology sort of like hurdle to do on this journey to production. What do you think about that, Sarah?
Yeah, so I would say probably in previous roles, technology definitely would have been high up there in one of the greatest challenges. I think that's why we've put a lot of focus on it, over the last year, in the group we're in now, because I think, as you mentioned, there can be this huge manual burden that can start falling on your data scientists of upkeep, and refreshing and fixing. And so there's a lot you can do on the tools and technology side to lift that burden off of those folks so that they can spend more of their time really thinking about the hard problems, or scoping the problems, or figuring out the right model, or the right way to put something into production so that it has impact and value. So I think on our side, the thing that I've been thinking about the most recently is really the process side of things, because I think that the people and talent management, recruiting, all of that is always going to be a challenge, and it's definitely a challenge in the data science space at the moment. And technology kind of has to be there to be able to have the right tooling. But to me, the process is the glue that really holds everything together. So you can have an incredibly smart person working with the best tools, but if you don't think about the right way to put something in practice that's reproducible, that doesn't depend on just the genius of one person, or tools that are kind of being held together, that I think that process is really the thing that brings those other two elements to life, and makes it something that can scale and be reproduced and maintained.
It's always fun to be that one person, right? For a little while. Mike, you're that one person. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I also Sarah here. I think this is super important and super challenging, simply because, especially in our current state, when we have so many POC models that we have in the backlog wanting to push to production, it would have been nice to have built those models initially with the entire end-to-end process in mind. And ensure that maybe you add parameters into certain files to make sure that it's easily scalable, or it can easily be ported to another use case, or maybe you ensure that the code has certain standards that are universal across the entire company. That way, it's easy to productionize. These sorts of best practices, instilling back into a previously built model is a lot more difficult to kind of retrofit them. So I think identifying the proper best practices and processes is super vital, and currently is our biggest challenge. Unifying.
Interesting.
Yeah.
See, and so I'll say it, like I've always found the people part to be the most challenging personally. And I'd say that like along a couple of dimensions, especially when we think about productionalization, this world of ML ops, or whatever we sort of call operationalization, O16 and whatever, is still really new. And so this finding people who've actually been there and done that, there's not very many people out there, because not very many companies have hit this. And so for me, I've always found I can sometimes fit the technology, or you can find a hole to fill the technology, have the right people. And same thing from a process perspective is, processes at every company I've been at have been different, but we've been able to, usually mostly successful in adapting those processes to the people that we have. The other piece that, and I would actually, especially when we think about the sort of like last mile idea, one of the people challenges that I've found the hardest isn't necessarily the people within the data science team or within the actual build team. What do you guys like from a productionalization perspective? What do you think about the challenge of the consumers of your model, right? So, your internal customers for whom you're building these products. Do you guys find that part to be challenging? And maybe that's a dumb question. So maybe more specifically, like, where have you been successful in sort of like being able to really not just build and push a model out, but like get it into the hands of people and helping them use it effectively?
Yeah, I would say, you know that Palo Alto Network is really well established in terms of AI. So I would say I had the least challenges with the stakeholders. All of them could really understand the ML, and they had really reasonable expectations. So that was not a big challenge for me. So, technology was, especially when we migrated from Prem to to cloud-based technology. So, but right now, yes, people is not really a big challenge for us.
I'm a little jealous.
Yeah, and I'll say that, like, I think if you were to ask this question to a J&J member a couple of years ago, it would have been, oh yeah, absolutely, getting buy-in, trying to get the stakeholders to trust the results, or even the approach, getting the buy-in there, would have been a huge challenge. But I think because some early POCs have shown real value, that's less of a hurdle now. And now the issue is too many people knocking on our door asking for work, and who do you say yes and who do you say no to? And I think the way that it helped was also that there was a lot of transparency, and maybe too many, but like tons and tons of meetings to constantly be making sure that the solution was tailored to what the question was, that we're not solving a problem that they thought they had, but the actual problem that they really do have, right? And then also continually getting feedback from the end users. The business partner may or may not be the actual end user of our product, to make sure that we get that feedback and what worked, what didn't work. And now, as we continue to develop, having that transparency and having that feedback is helped us get more trust, so that the next project has less of a barrier.
That's great.
Yeah, I would say, for us, I think a lot of it depends on the destination, of the model and what it's going to be used for, that can determine how difficult it is, or how much you need to manage that relationship and expectations with the stakeholders. And so I think some of it comes down to setting realistic expectations from the outset and the definitions that you use, because people could say you're going to build a churn model and you might think that means one thing, and then, two different marketing teams think it means something else. So making sure that you're all talking about the same thing, from the start, and communicating all the way, I think, is one thing that's important. And the other piece, I think, also depends on, are you building, something for machines or for consumption by people? And so I think a lot of people nowadays with data science are very trained to, okay, yeah, ML, you just care about, maximizing the accuracy of the model, and that's all that matters. But there are still many companies and many teams where, your marketers want the insights from it as well, whether that's a type of model that's going to provide insights, or whether you're then taking that end product and, packaging the story around it that makes sense. And so I think that's kind of one of the most critical pieces, that if you're not just building it for a machine to consume, then you really need to think about what people need to understand out of the model.
Well, and it's a really interesting point, that sort of idea of who's going to consume the output of this model. Is it a person or is it a machine? I think that changes what productionalization means, right? Because inserting, if the output is for a machine, right, then really production just means that you have an API that runs your algorithm, and then you're done, right? That's just production. That can be, especially on scale, challenge, right? When you're talking about thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of calls a second, that can be a huge challenge. So not to underscore that, but this other side of it, right, of the sort of influencing existing decision making, I do think that that's a really important aspect. And so you guys have had various successes talking about technology challenges, talking about people challenges, talking about process challenges. So thinking forward, right, we're coming off of the back of what hopefully none of us, we can all look back on as a terrible year and not the start of a terrible decade, maybe, I don't know. So we'll call it an anomaly, a blip. So 2021, it's a new year. We're all focusing on new problems. We're talking about what it is that we're going to do this year. So what are you guys focusing on this year in terms of continuing to maximize your impact, push more models out? What's the priorities that you're setting to be able to, enable these things? Sarah, why don't you go ahead? Oh, sorry. Sarah, please.
No problem. Yeah, so I think we're at the fun spot where we've done a lot of this foundation setting and infrastructure work, and so now we get to really reap the benefits of that. So when we're looking forward at the next year, it's really now accelerating into this and actually taking that pipeline of models and starting to just really build and deploy models and see the impact of that work.
Okay. Great. Rasul, sorry, I cut you off before.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, for me and for my team, I would say the most important thing is deliver more values to the customers. So we will continue working on churn, model prediction, propensity, chatbot, or other technologies in order to have more success and make customers happier.
So let me ask a question on that. So do you talk about maximizing value? How much of that is in new products, so to speak? And how much of that is in continuing to improve what's already out there?
So I would say it's 50-50. So before that was more on POC, but right now, because of some changes in management, we decided to have 50-50.
Okay, it's an interesting balance. Okay, very cool. And Mike.
Yeah, so this is going to be a busy year for us. When COVID happened, if anything, it didn't slow anything down. It added more work for us. So we just wrapped up, or we're wrapping up right now, fairly large projects involving several key brands across the Janssen portfolio, and that model is being aimed to be productionized in the next couple of weeks, pushed out, and actually get the insights sent out to the field. And then while that is being deployed and monitored, we'll be also expanding to new brands as well. So hopefully the process, coming back to some of the challenges that we faced, we tried to lay out a framework from start to end. This is how we can start a project and move all the way to production. And we're hoping that was laid out properly, because we're going to take that and try it again. So use the same framework, take the same core models that we have now, productionize them for new use cases, and hoping that a lot of work last year will turn into just a mountain of models and deployed and in production in 2021.
Well, and so that's I say a similar theme then, right? So both you and Sarah have talked about this. This last year was a lot of foundational work, prep work, creating the templates for the process, and hopefully now this year you get to start to reap some of the reward of last year's hard work. Awesome. Well, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I had a really fun conversation. So, I hope everybody was able to learn a little bit from each other here. We'll end now. I hope everybody can join for the live session. We'll have some Q&A, can dig in deeper on some of these topics, but thank you very much for everybody. I really appreciate your participation. I learned plenty. So it was a success for me, and I hope it was for everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Connor.
All right. Awesome. Let's bring our panelists up. Connor, Sarah, Mike, welcome.
Howdy.
I
Thanks,
already learned a ton from that session, especially that O16N is a much easier way to say operationalization.
Operationalization it's a fun word to say repeatedly, but yeah, it's definitely O16N is a much easier and harder to screw up way to put it. Nice.
It looks like all of you have been active in the chat, and I think we're caught up on questions. So I'd encourage our audience to chime in with additional questions. One of the points that came up in the Q&A that I thought was interesting was the role of broadly establishing credibility with leadership and establishing value with leadership. I'm wondering if each of you can riff on that a little bit as we're waiting for questions.
Sarah, why don't you go ahead on that one? That's something we've talked about. Maybe. All right, I'll take a stab. So that, as I said in the chat, that idea of establishing the credibility, it's always getting that ball rolling. And how do you get started? I think there were a couple examples. I think Mike talked definitely about, like, right now they've got too much.
So I think when it comes,
we can hear you.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Sounds like a delay on Sarah's end.
All right, I think.
Go ahead, Connor.
Okay. So yeah, like it's getting the ball rolling, and as I said right in the chat, I'm a big fan of the prototype, because especially for a newer team or a company that's sort of new at this, like, until people have actually really worked with some sort of AI product that says, like, hey, here's what we're trying to do for you. And it doesn't have to be super slick. It doesn't have to be super comprehensive, but giving them something and an interface, I think that's like a part that we miss a lot on, is the actual UI that you give to a customer is not more important than the analytics, but it's as important, because if the output of your fancy model is a CSV that you emailed to them, that it's just not very impressive. It's like, oh, okay, so this is the same thing I've always dealt with. So that is a really important piece to me. That first one, just getting that first product out of them, getting it to their people, because that's what gets them engaged and gets them excited.
Awesome, Mike.
Yeah, I'm gonna totally agree with Connor. The initial POC phase is a great way to get early buy-in and to get some trust. And to that point, also, it doesn't have to be like a full-blown ML project. It could be just some slightly more advanced algorithms or approaches that the business maybe hasn't used historically, and showing some early quick wins, right? Like something that you can push out in a couple weeks or a couple months versus a several month to long year-long project, where you can show that value really fast and baby steps. I think is really useful.
How about you, Sarah? You with us? All right. There was a question from Alan around how you handle going to gamification of user interaction, games, markets, auctions, and applying reinforcement learning to those types of interactions.
So that's a tricky one, right? Because reinforcement learning is, I think, a big area of opportunity, right? And certainly, we see it impactful in, the development of products for gaming. Specifically, I think that there's been a lot of hype around it. It is an area that our R&D team is working on, actually sort of exploring how do we apply it. I think most of the use cases right now are still sort of unclear. Where I think that there's the most opportunity for this personally is where you're talking about internal decision-making processes that are being completely overrun by, or being sort of completely automated by an AI product, where you have to be getting feedback from that internal user of was this helpful, right? So an example would be a project we were working on around helping support engineers find internal support documentation and knowledge base sort of stuff to give responses back. And so we built a model that would recommend, here's the article that is the right article. But then we're specifically asking for feedback every time. Was this article helpful? So that's immediately feeding back into the model to do that sort of refresh and improve. And that's that's the first sort of example where I'm actually seeing us using some reinforcement learning to improve a model continuously. It's not a huge, it's not the biggest one, but it's the first actual real life example where I've seen that take shape.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'd like to thank Connor and Mike, as well as Sarah. Sorry we weren't able to pull her into the Q&A, for joining us for the Q&A session. Great panel, and enjoy the rest of TWiMLCon.
Thank you very much, Sam. Pleasure.
Thank you.